Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's Workshop. So this was a flashback to the part 1 video for the food prep. If you haven't seen it already, check it out in my playlist. So dolls, this was a little pan of chicken that I made for a previous project. I never used it, and I thought it would be great to use for the party. So I decided to make it look like barbecued chicken, since I'm actually going to serve barbecue at the party. So instead of allowing it to look like just regular fried chicken, I added some orange and red paint to it and mixed it up to make it look as though it was barbecue sauce. And after I coated it really, really good, this is a perfect example of why I say keep your pieces you don't use in other projects because they may come in handy, like for a party. That actually turned out really cute. So let's move on, dolls. So I decided to go ahead and get this ham dressed since I already had out the red and the brown paint. So dolls, I started by adding some reddish color to the bone or the center portion of the bone of the ham. Now I realized that I should have left like a little divot or indentation in the bone, but I decided to trim off a little bit of the meat on the bone on the end to expose that a little. And then I took my craft knife and kind of gouged out some of the center of the bone at the front of the ham to allow it to have some room for my stain and coloring to settle. I actually should have done that in my designing process, but the great thing about polymer clay that is that even after it's baked, it's sandable and carvable. And now I'm going ahead to add some of that same stain color that I used for the barbecue sauce on the body of my ham. Now I'm just coating it up with this first layer of the red and brown to just give it more of to make the ham look as though it's been cooked, baked, glazed, and cured. Now, dolls, you know I didn't stop with the orange and the brown. I did a little bit more red and some golden sienna, and I let that dry. And here I have a couple pieces of sliced ham and things that are preparing for the garnish for the plate for the ham and the chicken. So here's my little chicken. And again, I already had out the brown and golden paint. And so I began to hand roast my chicken. And so I started with that golden coat with the raw sienna just to give it a little stain because the natural color that I used to do my chicken was more or less just a base coat. Now there are a lot of different tones of polymer clay you can use for your chickens, but in this instance I used some leftover brown clay that I had after I made the sweet potato pies. Now this is a previous chicken that I made and I made it out of a more of a translucent clay. So you get different effects depending on what type of clay you use. Now here I'm adding a little seasoning in the form of some shredded charcoal, black charcoal as pepper. I guess I do layers even with seasoning. And after I finished with the black pepper, I went on to the paprika. And dolls, you know it has to have paprika on it. And I just used the red chalk pastel. I feel like cooking for real now. And dolls, I added a little orange to give it a little extra spice. And after I completed all of my seasonings, I brushed it really lightly with my craft glaze for shine and glazing purposes. I wanted my chicken to look as though it just came out of the oven and was ready to carve. And there my chicken is all ready for garnish. Now, dolls, here is my lovely bowl of potato salad with the green peppers and green onions, but it's definitely not finished because, as you all know, it has to have paprika. But before I add the paprika, I put a little craft glaze on it so that the paprika would have something to stick to or settle into. I just brushed a light coat all over the whole surface of the potato salad. And before I allowed it to dry, I got out that red chalk pastel that I just used on my chicken and made my paprika. I'm really tickled the way my potato salad turned out, so I just had to complete it with that last finishing touch because growing up, potato salad wasn't right if it didn't have paprika on top. Dolls, I just can't explain to you how much fun I'm having right now. So now that that ham has dried a little bit, let's go ahead and get it set up. So the chicken is done, and I'm trying to determine which platter to put it on, but I think the chicken is going to be on the silver platter, and I'm going to put the ham on the bigger ceramic platter because I'm going to need extra room for the sliced ham. So I decided to add a little bit of the Kraft glaze to the bottom of the silver platter for the chicken, and I will add the garnish later. That chicken is filling up that platter pretty well, so I may not have a lot of room for too much garnish, but we'll see what I can do. I just wanted to add a little extra glaze to the top to make sure all my spices are sealed in really well. Now let that sit aside and dry. So let's go ahead and glaze up this ham now that it's dry, and I'm going to glue it to the platter. So I already added the Kraft glaze to the platter and just adding a light coat of the Kraft glaze to the body of the ham again, so it'll look like it's been cooked and glazed. And some may ask, why did you add Kraft glaze to the platter? It has a dual purpose because I want it to look like grease from the ham, but it also acts as an adhesive. Now, I really enjoy this part, dolls. I really love arranging the food on the platter because to me this gives it so much realism when you add the additional things to the platter. Now here I did add a little bit additional color because I wanted more color to settle into those grooves that I carved into the body of the ham to look as though it had that meat netting on it that you see on glazed hams. Now, dolls, I'm adding my garnish to the ham platter, and I'm not very specific when it comes to things like that. I had a few green beans left over from when I made my green bean pan, and I also had some other sliced vegetables left over from another project. And again, dolls, this is why I say don't throw anything away because you never know when those little remnants and scraps come in really handy. And I had the green beans, and I did have the sliced ham that I prepared earlier from the previous video. Now, if you haven't seen the food prep video part 1, definitely check that out in my playlist. And then I actually had a little more ham than I really realized, so I was able to put a nice serving of ham here on the front of the ham platter, and I also have enough left over to do a whole ham plate. So that's really great because I want to have plenty of food for everyone at the party. And here I am, dolls, adding more Kraft glaze to ensure that my ham does not look dry. And it also again acts as an adhesive as well. It will keep those pieces stuck together on the front of the platter. So this will be one unit. This will be one piece of art. I won't have little slices of ham flying all around. So that makes it really easy to handle, and it'll be easy when I'm setting things up in the dining room. Dolls, I'm really pleased with the way the ham turned out, but I'm thinking about adding some actual string to simulate the netting around the body of the ham. But I'm going to go ahead and finish with this part. This is the only thing about doing this type of decorating or setting. You just keep getting more ideas. The longer you work, you see more things, you think of more things to do, and you actually have to almost turn your mind down because the ideas just keep coming. And I found another food remnant that looked like a sliced onion or a potato or something. So I just laid those around the side as well to just give a little variation instead of just the green beans. So I'm going to lay a couple on this side, and then I do believe I have another spare one that I can put on the other side. So anytime you're making food items, dolls, make more than what you need because the extras always come in handy. I've got more ideas, but I'm going to stop for now. So, dolls, let's move on to the chicken. So, yes, we do have a baked chicken, but you know, dolls, we need options on the table. And at my house, fried chicken is more like a mainstay rather than an option. Regardless of whatever meat we're having, there will be fried chicken. So I put the small pieces of chicken into that same pan that we used for the potatoes. Now, dolls, it's not a sanitation issue because this is polymer clay, but it's the perfect size and shape to do my shading. So I actually added like a golden sienna, and now I'm adding some chalk pastels in brown. I'm adding that to provide variation in the color and to represent spices or breading as well. And after everything is all coated really nicely, I'm definitely going to add more craft glaze. Now, when I was growing up, dolls, anytime that there was fried chicken, there was always a big black pan, and that's what I have. A little black pan. I thought it was so adorable. When I found it on some website, it just looked so iconic to me. I had to have it, and it's got a lovely little lid. The only difference is the black pans we had little speckles on them. I keep saying I should probably add some splatter paint to it one day, but today won't be that day. So let me allow these little chicken pieces to dry so I can move on. So guys, these are some cute little plates that I'm not going to use in any of my displays. So I decided to use them to put food on them for the dolls at the party. Now I made a little pan of macaroni and cheese that hasn't dried yet. So I'm going to kind of set up a plate that someone started and they hadn't completed. So I just put a little macaroni and cheese on the corner. Now I actually wasn't finished with this macaroni and cheese. Again, as I mentioned, it's not dry yet. But yeah, macaroni and cheese doesn't look right unless somebody's already spooned it out because almost as soon as it comes out of the oven, somebody's getting some. So I felt this was the perfect opportunity to pre-make up some of the plates. I better not use too much of the macaroni and cheese or I'll need another pan. And dolls, this is just a glance at that partially finished plate and the plate of ham. And that's the plate of ham that I made with the spare ham slices. Now here, dolls, I made a super simple cheesecake with some of the clay I had left over from the butter. It's just a simple disc shape and I flattened it and I just added a brownish looking clay to the bottom that looked like the graham cracker crust and I smoothed it up to the pre-baked piece of yellow. So I'm just using my tool to smash it up so that it'll look like it's one piece rather than a solid piece that I'm baking a soft piece to. And I'm doing all the work on my tile so that I won't have to move it to bake it. And I'm using my little brush tool to make little puncture marks at the bottom to give the illusion of crumbs or crumbling for the graham cracker crust part. Now it's really hard for me to show you this, dolls. I didn't realize I was moving the camera around so much, but with projects like this, you have to check all the angles. So here was another fun project. I call it my creamy tart project. So I pre-baked some creamy looking cheesecake like clay into the body of a glass cake pedestal. And I've added the craft glaze. Now be aware, dolls, these little fruit pieces I did not make. I actually purchased them in a bundle, a really great price from some vendor on eBay. So they're absolutely lovely. They're uniform, perfect shape and color. I mean, very, very realistic. I probably would never make something that detailed, that small. Yeah, I don't have the patience for that as much as I do. That was a little bit over the top for me, but I thought they were adorable and I had to have them. So I thought they were really perfect for this project. So I'm going to add these all around in almost a carousel-like design and kind of overlap each one of them. Now, all of these pieces, again, I purchased, but I did make some random grapes. And I thought they would look really pretty. And then I had strawberries from the same collection and I put them all together. I thought this was absolutely beautiful. It looked like a really fresh fruit type dessert to be on the table. I thought it would look really colorful and beautiful along with all the other traditional things that I have on the table. I thought this would look like a really nice fresh fruit custard dessert. Dolls, I have to be honest, I really struggled with this whole macaroni and cheese project. I don't know. I'm really struggling because I really couldn't find anything that looked like elbows, and I kept trying to simulate the melted cheese effect, and I really struggled with it. So at this point, I just have to walk away. Now, dolls, I realized that I needed more cornbread because I have cabbage and greens and green beans, but I only have one small pan of cornbread in the kitchen. So I definitely needed to make more cornbread for the party. So I decided to use the option of just kind of making a freehand cornbread patty and then cut it up into big square chunks. Now, dolls, if you say that my cornmeal or cornbread clay is pretty yellow, it is because I really do like yellow cornbread, not Jiffy, but I do like yellow cornbread. And so if I made this a little extra yellow, yeah, I probably did because I really wanted to show up and stand out on the table. So I'm just shaping it into more or less a rough shape of a square so that I can texture it and cut it into big square chunks of cornbread for the table. Now, I just wanted to kind of give a rough of what a big pan of square cornbread would be. So this was my adaptation of that. And I started texturing it with the side of my brush tool, and I realized, no, you use that for fish, and realized that I needed to use my aluminum foil crumbled up to give the texture that I wanted for the cornbread. And so I just gently rolled it across the surface and around the sides until I got the desired look for the cornbread surface. And then I began to shape it, square it out a little bit, and then cut it into nice big chunks. Now, dolls, this is a very tedious process for this because I'm going to have to texture each piece of cornbread. And I was working pretty quickly because I have so many things to do. So I split it up onto 2 tiles and then cut the individual chunks so that I could individually texture them. And I'm really glad I had the 2 small tiles because it really made texturing them a lot easier, and it made it easier to cut them as well because the tile kind of keeps the clay at a cool temperature, which makes it a little bit firmer. And yeah, it just made the whole process a lot simpler because I just kind of pressed the pieces down to the tile so that they will be firm enough when I begin to use my brush tool. So I just have to slide them away from each other so there'll be enough room around them to get to all the sides. So here I am just texturing the little pieces, and the little brush tool works out so well because it can get to all the little spaces really easily. And then it's time to bake. Now, dolls, I do believe I saw a request for my pound cake. Some of my friends were teasing me on my Facebook page that I hadn't baked in a while since I started doing Dollhouse videos. I think my worlds are beginning to blur. So I'm going to use a piece of the clay in a very similar tone of the cornbread. And it really works out good because I'm going to shade the outside anyway. So I start with a round ball, and then I have to pierce the center because the pound cakes we had when I was a little girl, they had a hole in the center because the pans we used were tube pans. And when I was growing up, the bundt cake was very, very popular. So many times that I saw a pound cake, it was made with a bundt pan. So what I'm going to do, dolls, is use my tool to create the bundt texture on the outside of the cake. Now, it's not going to be perfect. I'm going to just make little indentions to create that bunting texture, and then I'm going to work over it and smooth it, and it will be softened as I go further with decorating the cake. Now, right now, it looks sort of like a pumpkin, but that's not the look that I'm going for, dolls. And now that the general shape is in, I'm going to kind of pull on it with my tool to make it a taller cake because I don't want it to be a short, flat, squatty cake. I want it to be a tall cake, a cake that looks as though it was baked in an 18-cup bundt cake pan. My friend over at Gleek's Kitchen would know what that is. So I'm just using the tool to just press it in and pull up on it at the same time to give it that tall cake effect. Now I'm using another, like a large ball stylus tool to soften those lines so they don't look so defined, and they'll look more like the indentions that a cake gets from being in a bundt pan and baking. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to give the impression. And here's just a closer look of me softening those defined lines where my bunt marks should be. And so now, dolls, I'm going in with my brush tool. Now, some may say the surface of my cake is pretty coarse, but to me, those are the type of pound cakes I really like. The ones that have the really big, crumbly crumbs, not the really fine crumbs that are almost like powder or dust. Big soft crumbs that are moist and you smash your finger on it, they stick together. Okay, I'm going too far, dolls, but yeah, that's how I like my pound cake. So the surface of it looks a little coarse, but it's going to be really, really good. So now, dolls, it's time for a slice. A big, gigantic, delicious chunk of pound cake. So this slice I'm going to cut and prepare to put on one of the plates. I think that'll look really cute at the party, as though somebody went for the cake first. Now, dolls, sometime if you slice your cake and your clay is not really firm, you may have to do some reshaping, which was my case. Now, it didn't take a lot of shaping to get my slice back on track. And just kind of patted it around and just shaped it a little bit because it never has to fit back into that space. But I also needed to texturize those insides of the cake so that when you're looking at the cake from the display, the sides or the inside of the slice will look realistic. And I'm just using my brush tool to create the crumbly effect. And you just take your time. And I had to do the same thing to the surface of the actual cake slice. I love doing projects like this, dolls. The only downside is now I really do want some pound cake. So I patted it around the top and shaped the bottom and texturized the sides. And the other part is going to come in when I actually begin to shade and paint the cake. But this looks really great for the outside surface. I'm really excited about how it's going to turn out. So the pound cake is all set and ready to be baked. So dolls, I finally figured out what to do about the macaroni and cheese. I used some extra thick, half dried up, cream colored paint, and it worked really great as my cheese. I've got to show it to you because it's so funny to me. So I had some old cream paint and I pushed out a glob of it and that's what it looked like. And it really worked out well. And then I add some trickle thick glaze on top of it. And to me, it looks great. It really looks like macaroni and cheese now. Sometimes, dolls, it's just a whole thing of trial and error. This is an example of why you have to just keep going. Don't give up. You'll find a solution. So let's get on to this cake. So, dolls, you know I like to paint things in layers, and it's no different when it comes to my cakes because I want the colors to settle into the grooves of the bunting on the sides and into the little texture holes that I have. So my pound cakes are yellow and golden and brown. So I'm using several different coats of very watered down acrylic paint in all of those colors until I achieve the shade that I really like. And I went over it again and added more colors. And I did not forget the little slice as well because it needs to match. And if you watch very closely with each layer of color, it looked better and better. Well, at least to me it did because it looked more like my actual cakes. So, dolls, I was really frustrated that I didn't get to show you my potato salad process in part one. So I started over, did the formula again, and thought I'd show it to you now here in part two. And then I was having trouble with the craft glaze, and I opened the lid to alleviate the problem, and then this happened. So then there's that. So, dolls, I just had to move on after that. I went on to finish up the little cornbread chunks and the filled plates. So, dolls, here I'm just adding the finishing touches to a couple of plates that I wanted to be already filled with food, so it looked as though some of the guests had already made their plates. And here, dolls, I'm adding a little color and shine to my little cornbread chunks and adding them to the platter. So now it's all ready for the table. So let me go ahead and get the glaze on this cake and get it on the platter. I finally got everything done, dolls. So I'm so pleased and so excited about the big party. Now, if you've enjoyed this video today, let me know in the comments. Also, like, share, and subscribe. And always look for me on Mondays and Wednesdays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, dolls, we're headed to the countdown. So stay tuned so you don't miss the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.